Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I just muted myself. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's Ask the Experts session on workflows. Are they worth it? I'm Christy Green, a Senior Account Manager with CPI, and presenting today is Derek Chin, our Director of CX Solutions. We do want this to be an interactive session, so feel free to use the link at the top of the page, which Derek is going to put up right there. Anytime that you have a question that you want to submit, and feel free to submit it at any time. If you want to jot that down, you can submit it as things occur to you, or we'll be putting it back up again at the end of the presentation. Before we get totally into Derek's presentation, though, first I wanted to tell you just a little bit about CPI. We will be celebrating our 35th anniversary this year, and we've been an Oracle Gold partner specialized in Service Cloud for a little over 7 years. And if you've had the opportunity to work with Derek in the past, I think you'll know that he's well versed on the topic of Service Cloud. So with that said, I'll hand this over to Derek.
All right, thank you, Christy. Well, everybody, welcome to our Ask the Experts session. And, I think as Christy had mentioned before, my name is Derek Chin. I'm the Director of CX Solutions here at CPI. And really what we always hope to do is we hope to at least provide you guys with a little bit of information that you guys can walk away with. Certainly for us, the big value is that we want to present more questions for you, just so that you can really begin to think about how you guys are utilizing Oracle Service Cloud and whether or not you're actually getting the full value for everything that you have set up. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on. And so let's start really with the very first question here. What is workflow? So, as we were kind of thinking through how to approach this, there was actually a quote by a very famous poet that we felt was very appropriate. And so the quote goes, "Don't ever go with the flow, be the flow." And as you guys can see, this is Jay-Z. So, for us, I think that's really kind of, it's a good way to kind of segue into talking about workflow, because workflow in many ways, I think, can be a mystery, especially if you've never really had exposure to it. But, I think with that, what we'll do is we're going to kind of talk through some of the examples of maybe how you might hold workflow, or really more than anything, how you could hold workflow. And so with that, let's go ahead and really start talking about what is workflow. So when we talk about workflow, the first couple of things that really come to mind are business processes. So, when I say business processes, these are things that could be a little bit more formal. So maybe if you're in the manufacturing business or maybe the retail side of industry, you may actually formalize your RMA process through something like a workflow. Maybe in a customer service perspective, you may actually utilize workflow in an incident escalation capacity. Right. In both of those examples, though, the idea is that it is a very formal process that, one thing has to happen before another, and that there may actually be certain actions that happen in between that you'd like to ensure that they're in place in order to have a smooth transition from one phase to another. Also, along with these business processes, is that, you really can almost consider workflow as a guarantee that you're going to have a consistent business process, right? Business processes tend to work because they are in fact processes. There are things that you guys have discussed, whether it's with the business owners or as the business owner, and from that perspective, you want the same thing to happen over and over again. So with that, workflow really gives you the ability to repeat your actions so that all of your involved teams can really know what to expect. And especially when you're talking about a business process, that is very important, because knowing what you're going to receive on, kind of in that capacity of a formal process really allows you to then know how you're going to handle it time in and time out. Also, being purposeful when it comes to these business processes is very helpful, because it allows you the ability to control how your agents are going to engage with workspaces and your agent searches. So let me give you an example. If you have an exchange where one of the key factors is contact information for your agents, well, if you just present a workspace, there, certainly you can place a requirement on it, but they may not find that requirement until when they go to save, and it rejects their save because they haven't completed all of the required fields. So from that perspective, that really could be something that could be very helpful to you, because what ends up happening is that if you create a purposeful business process through the workflow, what you can now build is, once again, it is kind of a little piece of that consistency, but more than anything, there's purposeful thought and there's a purposeful approach in which you're taking, so that you know that you want the agent to do whatever the step is, and maybe that's looking up a contact prior to even getting to the incident, just so that you can really ensure that it's a smooth process, and also that you've built in some efficiencies, especially when it comes to things like average handle time. And last but not least, certainly standardization, and they all are kind of similar, I guess, if you want to consider that. But, when we talk about standardization, especially when it comes to a business work process, the workspaces are going to allow for more agent control and choice, right? And so, by adding the workflow, what you're going to do is you're actually going to allow the agents to choose, but they're choosing what you allow them to choose, if that makes sense. And so while you're doing that, you're giving them the flexibility to work the way that's comfortable for them, but, still providing the guardrails of the workflow, so that you can really ensure that you have a standardized approach to the way that they're deciding. So it's kind of that balance. It's a balance that does allow for your agents to really experience things the way that they would like to experience it, meanwhile giving you guys the control that ultimately, for every contact center, it's the most important thing to provide to them. The other side of this is to really talk about sequence. So workflow is, typically it's really looked at as business process, but, certainly when you talk about sequence, that really also is very important, because what you can provide is efficiency, right? First and foremost, we talk about efficiency through the reduction of agent workload by really leveraging the abilities of workflow. So, what we can do is we can actually, maybe if we know that there's consistently a value that's going to be in this field, we can populate it from here as part of the workflow. Now, you may say, well, I can certainly do that through workspace rules, and, and these are all 100% true things. However, the one thing that you may want to think about when it comes to a workflow is that a workflow is very much a macro view of what's happening versus a workspace where, you have to actually be in the workspace and you have to be thinking about it in terms of the granular details. So both are right, and certainly you can do the same actions in both ways, but a workflow provides you a larger perspective to help you to kind of navigate through multiple business processes, and more importantly, the layers of your business that you'll typically find. So the sequence structure, the structured nature of the workflow does allow for the agents to work in a framework, as we mentioned before. And so, but the one thing that you'll find is that when you create something too structured for agents, sometimes your agents rebel. So you'll find that creating a workspace, maybe in some cases even a script, where you've really driven everything into one particular set of decisions in one particular fashion in which you want them to complete their tickets, that may be all well and good, but what you may find is that that's really great for newer agents, but then your experienced agents may actually find that to be cumbersome because they want to go faster than what they're allowed to do. And so the balance here is that by allowing this choice through a workflow, what you may actually give them is you may give them a choice at the beginning, right? So as soon as they start a ticket, you could say, hey, do you want to go through the scripted version where we curate every single decision, every single thing that you see, or do you want free choice, right? And allow them to decide. So if I'm a new agent and I need a little more handholding, that's okay. We can actually see that through this workflow choice. Or, if I actually feel more experienced, I have my own methodologies that still fits within what we have as business guardrails and business rules. But, I've been around for a little bit and I kind of have the feel for it already. I have my own methodologies. Both can be okay. And that's one of the things that workflow can certainly enable for you guys. And last but not least, just to automate things, right? So to automate steps that really normally might be the responsibility of the agent during the process of working an incident. What you'll find is, that agents through the course of their day, they do a lot of the same repetitive actions, and we may automate some of these things through your workspace rules, and that's all great. But the added ability to automate these in a grander scale, in terms of maybe creating tasks for your agents, right? Creating multiple tasks so that if it's a prescribed action, so under this circumstance, maybe we want to create a number of tasks, may actually help them out to really kind of move things along. And so, so with all that said, I mean, certainly when we define what a workflow is, we really feel like these 8 things kind of help us to understand really what it is, and I think to a certain degree what it could be. So you may be asking at this point, well, how can I use workflows? And that's really where hopefully some of these concepts will kind of come to light for you. So so what I have in store is I certainly have a little demo for you guys. So I'll kind of demonstrate just 2 or 3 of these versions. I'll talk through them, and then we'll go ahead and get to some questions here. So let me go ahead. I'm going to bring up Oracle Service Cloud here. And so, so in this site, what I've done is I've actually just, I have a few examples here. I'll kind of talk through them, and and if I can, I'll actually show you what it looks like in reality. So in this particular first example, this is actually an automated workspace selection, right? So nothing too crazy. But the one thing that you'll notice is that in this particular instance, we have the entry point here, and then there's an attribute that's happening on every single one of these incidents, right? And so some of them may be who it's logged into, which most of them, and based on who it's logged into, we actually launch it into either a sub workflow or we launch them right into the workspace. And so from that perspective, it's really clear what you're going to see. So it's very possible that you could have a team of 20, 30 people where 5 people are going to see one workspace, 2 people are going to see another workspace, dependent on their responsibilities and dependent on their actions. And what's nice is that this all happens behind the scenes. It's automated. So for the end user, they're not really going to know the difference. They're not going to know that something magical is happening behind the scenes. So for this particular workflow, I'm not going to be able to show you guys an example because, essentially if I start it, it's just going to go to who I am, and it's just going to look like a regular workspace. But just kind of know behind the scenes that this is based off of the different criteria. Let me show you a different version of this. So this is actually something that I've actually found myself using a lot over the last couple of years, and that's really to create a manual selection. So one of the challenges that I certainly have as an administrator, and that for many of my clients that I've kind of talked to, if you have a site where you have multiple workspaces for different audiences or whatnot, what sometimes becomes the challenge is how do you manage all the different workspaces based off of your needs, right? Because one request may be workspace A, and then the next request is workspace B, and then you'll have to switch back and forth. And so without workflow, how you have to do it is you actually have to change either your profile or you actually have to change the workspaces in the profile. Both of those don't really sound very convenient. And so, in kind of utilizing and leveraging workflow, what we've been able to do is to create a workspace selector. So this is nothing fancy, but this hopefully is kind of one of those out-of-the-box ways for you to really get a lot of flexibility, and most importantly, flexibility for yourself, so that you can really only have one workflow assigned to your profile, but you'll have access to all your workspaces. So let me go ahead and I'll actually preview this one. So you can see here, so this is a really simple workspace. The very first workspace we go into has 4 buttons, right? So for some clients, we have a much fancier version of this, but this is our internal site. So, I just kind of needed something functional. So we have the 4 different buttons. So I'll go ahead and click on this one. And when I do, it actually brings up our normal ticket workspace. So, if I need to work a ticket, here we are, we're right into the tickets. Now, let's do that one more time, but this time I'm actually going to choose something different. So let's say that I actually want to go into this Ready 2311 workspace. And so if I click on that, a whole new workspace pops up. So what's really nice is that depending on what I want to do as the administrator, this could be really functional in terms of me just being able to troubleshoot a problem, or if I had different teams that actually have different data that needs to show, I'd be able to kind of do that by just toggling the workspace, not having to do a whole lot of things behind the scenes. So, fairly little, very little fuss, but certainly really functional. The next thing I want to kind of talk through is what we refer to as a parent-child relationship. And so parent-child relationships probably aren't a new concept for a lot of you, but this is the example where you'll want to associate a ticket to another ticket, right? So that it's maybe, I guess you want to consider it like a continuation of a conversation, or in some cases, you just want to relate it, right? And so what we've done here is we've actually created a workspace where within the workspace here, what's going to happen is that once we hit the trigger, and there's a picture that I've chosen to be the trigger, what we're going to do is we're actually copying the entire ticket. Then we change some escalation fields, and then we launch it into a completely different child workspace, so that in effect, we're actually working two distinctly different tickets. When we're done, we actually then return back to the parent ticket. And so let me show you what that looks like. And here the functionality is pretty nice, so that what we have is we have really the ability to create related tickets without literally by a button click. So I'm actually just going to type here. I'm going to say test ticket, and we'll leave the rest here. So at this point, what I want to do is I'm just going to click on this picture. And so you can see here we have a message that says my record has now been duplicated. And this is a message you guys can change. I just chose to use this language. So as soon as I say OK, here we are in the child ticket. And first thing we can see is we can see that it actually it went ahead and it created some different language. So this was kind of the escalation. So the example in which we use this a lot is potentially if you actually have some customer, or you have some escalations where they're not licensed users in your system, what you can do is you can actually use this parent-child scenario where you can send them separate emails, right? So what that allows you to do is you can choose a totally separate contact. You can classify it in whatever way you want. You can even add specialized content specifically for them. And then when you're done, then you're able to go back to your parent incident, and you can retain that original contact. You can retain all that original information, so that it really allows you to, in effect, have two separate conversations that are completely apart, but they're all still related back to that same initial correspondence that you had with your customer. All right, and the last example. So this is probably, I guess if you want to call it the most complicated version of this. So in this particular demo, what I wanted to do is I wanted to really kind of portray a triage style. And what I mean by triage style is that in some cases, what you may have is you may have a tier 1 or level 1 where you're just intaking everything. And what you may find is that all of these issues may be all over the place, but it's important to have them with that human contact up front. From there, wherever they send it, then what may happen is that there's additional tasks that need to be added on. There might be additional things that need to occur. And so in this particular scenario, what we have is we have an initial ticket, and then based on the product that they select, we actually then create a whole number of these other tasks associated to it. And so along with that, we could certainly change routing. We can do a whole lot of other things, but for this example, I just added tasks. So in this case, let's go ahead and preview this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, so we're just going to take a look at this. I'm going to once again say test ticket. And under product, I'm actually going to choose this. And when I choose this, what ends up happening is I get an error message. But along with the error message, you can see that we actually populated this ticket with 3 different tasks. What I've also done is I've also now established due dates for the tasks. I've established the names for the task, who they're assigned to. And so, at this point, this may be the additional actions that somebody may have had to do at some point where, the initial tier 1 agent may have sent it on to an escalation. The escalation would then need to keep track of their own types of activities. With this workflow, what we're doing is we're actually pre-populating all of that in a way that really makes it really easy. So at this point, as the tier 1 agent, I may be done. And what I actually could have included was a save and close as part of this, where, once they do that, it saves and closes the incident and they can move on to their next thing. So, it's in the world of contact centers, I think, as everybody recognizes, it's not about saving these large minutes. And, it's really about saving a few seconds here and there, because, over the course of 100 calls, a few seconds here and there really becomes minutes and hours. And so that's kind of, so those are my examples. So with that, I'm going to bring us back over to, let's bring us back over here. And I do know that we have a few questions that have come through. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just kind of show them on the board here, and we can kind of talk through some of these questions. So the first question that we have is, can you use workflows to cross tables? So things like create assets, create campaigns. The answer is yes, right? And so that's really the biggest power of workflow and how it's very different than, say, a workspace rule. So as I mentioned before, you could do a lot of the similar things, especially when it comes to the changing the values within a workspace rule. But the one thing that really stands apart is your ability to create new objects. You can load new objects. You can change the actual associated objects. So if you wanted to change a contact, an organization, so on and so forth, you can change that all through workflow. So the answer to this question is yes, you can actually use a workflow to cross tables. So I could be in an incident workflow and then at the same time also create an asset, create a campaign, create a contact, create a task, all by using workflow. Okay, so another question that has come through, does workflow cost extra? So the quick answer to that is that it does depend. It depends on which licensing that you guys have. And unfortunately, with all the different groups that we have on the phone, it's hard to say one way or another. The one thing that I would certainly say is that if you do have specific questions about that, I would say, at minimum, you could reach out to Christy, and Christy can at least help you to kind of understand, whether or not it's an additional thing that you'll need to purchase, or at least kind of lead you in the right direction. All right, so can workflow be used with knowledge? So that's an interesting, it's an interesting question in that, workflow can actually be used for knowledge, right? And so just like any other object, we can use workflow to create a knowledge article if you wanted to, or to look up a knowledge article. So absolutely, workflow can be used with knowledge. Now, and it's really going to depend on your workflow process, right? Because, what you'll find is that workflow, because of its ability to essentially do everything that you might want to do with a business process, you may find that there might be other more efficient ways to go about it, but certainly you could actually use workflow with knowledge. So the next question we have is, can workflow be used with the browser user interface? So this is a great question, and actually it's a timely question, because as of version 17D, workflow can actually be used with the browser user interface. Now, there's certain aspects of it that it still can't do, but there's some basic components, things like creation. I believe you can do copies, but there are certain restrictions. And what I would do is I would refer you to the Oracle documentation specific to 17D, 18D, depending on which version you guys are in. But really, starting in 17D is when they've enabled a lot of this functionality into the browser user interface. So that's certainly exciting for us. Okay, so last question that I have here is based on what you said earlier in the presentation. You're saying that workflows can be enabled per agent depending on their preferences. It can be enabled not necessarily by agent, but by profile. So for example, let's say that you have an agent profile in which you want to present certain workspaces that are agent oriented. You could, in fact, do that, right? Where it's like purely just kind of the business process. But let's say that you have another profile in which it's the administrator, right? So like maybe it's the profile that I might use, where you might have a parent workflow that references this agent workflow, so that you'll still get the same functionality, but I might have the additional selector where I can go and choose my workspace. So that's all absolutely possible. But to answer this specific question, workflows can be enabled by profile, not by agent. So I hope that helps. All right, so I think that's all the questions that I see in my list here. So we can certainly hold on for we'll hold on for a few more moments here. If you guys do have any other questions, these are excellent questions. If you guys do have any other questions, please feel free to submit them to this Google link, and we'll see them right away. All right. Well, I think at this point, I do not see any additional questions coming through. I will definitely tell you guys, if you do have any questions, you can certainly find us at CPI.Solutions, or, certainly at any time, please contact Christy Green at cgreen@cpi.solutions, and she'll be able to help you out with any of these other questions that you guys may have. With that said, we appreciate your time and thank you guys for joining us for a little bit this Wednesday afternoon.